Have you ever made a choice that you knew would change everything? That night, as I stood outside his door, my heart racing, I had no idea what I was about to see, or how it would affect me forever. My uncle had always been someone I looked up to. After his divorce, he moved in with us, and it was supposed to be temporary. But as time went on, he became more than just family to me. He became a friend, a confidant, and someone I could talk to when no one else seemed to understand. He was the kind of person who always knew the right thing to say, someone whose presence made everything feel okay, even when things in my life weren't. And I never once questioned the connection we shared. But what I didn't realize was that things weren't always as simple as they seemed. That night, I was about to learn just how complicated feelings could get. It was one of those quiet nights, the kind where the house feels almost too still, and the only noise you hear is the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The evening had been laid back, my uncle and I had spent hours together, playing games, cracking jokes, and just enjoying the time we had. We watched Netflix for a while, like we usually did on nights when there was nothing else to do, just relaxing after a long day. But eventually, everyone else had gone to bed early. My parents were already tucked away in their room, and my cousin had fallen asleep on the couch. The house felt almost deserted, with nothing but the occasional creak of the old wooden floors to break the silence. I was left alone with my thoughts, but it wasn't the peaceful solitude I was used to. Tonight, something felt different. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, and no matter how many times I tossed and turned, I just couldn't shake off the restlessness that had settled in my chest. I got up, walked around the house for a bit, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls. I didn't want to go back to my room, and the quiet seemed to press in on me from all sides. The tension felt almost suffocating. I walked past the kitchen, and the cold light from the refrigerator flickered, offering a small comfort in the otherwise dark house. But even that didn't help. My eyes kept drifting back to the hallway, to his room. It was then that I noticed the light under his door. It was still on. My uncle always turned his light off when he went to bed, he was a creature of habit, just like me. But tonight, something was different. I stood there for a moment, frozen. Part of me told myself I should just forget it and go back to bed. But something tugged at me, a pull I couldn't explain. Curiosity. Maybe loneliness. I don't know. Before I could stop myself, I was already walking toward his door. My heart was beating faster now, and every step felt heavier than the last. I reached the door, hand hovering above the doorknob. The light from the crack in the door flickered again, casting strange shadows on the walls. I should have turned back. But I didn't. I stood frozen at the door, my hand still gripping the knob. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow from his desk lamp casting long shadows across the walls. I should have walked away. I should have just turned around and gone back to my room, pretending I hadn't noticed anything. But I couldn't. I couldn't move. I didn't even realize that I had already pushed the door open just enough to see inside. There he was. My uncle. Completely unaware I was standing there, lost in a private moment. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, his body relaxed, but his hands were moving, his fingers, doing something that I never expected. He was playing with himself. My heart dropped into my stomach. It took a few seconds for my brain to process what I was seeing. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't look away, even though everything in me screamed that I should. Neither of us spoke at first. For what felt like an eternity, I just stood there, paralyzed. My body wanted to turn and flee, but my mind couldn't let go of what I was seeing. I felt a mix of shock, confusion, and a strange sense of guilt washing over me. This wasn't supposed to be happening. This wasn't normal. Then, he looked up. His eyes widened for a split second, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. But instead of reacting the way I expected, pulling away, being ashamed, or telling me to leave, he just stared at me, calm and unbothered. He didn't seem embarrassed. And then, his voice broke the silence. "Do you want to join me?" he asked, as though it was the most casual thing in the world. His tone was calm, almost inviting, like this was something we had talked about before. My mind was a mess. I wanted to scream, to slam the door shut, to run away as fast as I could. But another part of me, a part one couldn't ignore, a part that had been there long before this moment, was intrigued. Was curious. What would it be like? What would it feel like? I had pushed away these thoughts before, told myself it was wrong, that I shouldn't even think about it. But now, standing in that doorway, I couldn't tell the difference between what was right or wrong. I was caught in the moment, the tension so thick I could feel it in my chest. My body was frozen in place, unsure of what to do, what to feel. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my heart racing in my chest. My mind was fighting against itself, torn between everything I knew to be right and this dark, overwhelming pull I couldn't ignore. Every instinct told me to run, to leave before anything could happen. But the curiosity, the confusion, the desire I had been suppressing for so long, everything felt louder now. I had thought about this moment more times than I was willing to admit, each time telling myself it was just a fleeting thought, a fantasy. But standing in front of him now, it felt like all those thoughts had led me here, to this point where it was no longer just an idea. It was real. He was real. And I was standing there, in his room, with the door cracked open, the tension thick in the air. I don't know what made me decide to go through with it. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was the urge to finally confront the feelings I had buried deep inside me. Maybe it was the strange connection I had with him, the closeness we shared, even if it was supposed to be just familial. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the fear that if I didn't, I'd never truly understand what it would have felt like. Before I could even think it through, I was stepping into his room, closing the door behind me. My breath caught as I crossed the threshold, the weight of what I was doing sinking in with each step I took. There was no turning back now, the air between us was thick with tension, heavier with every passing second. My heart raced as I stepped closer, the sound of it echoing in my ears. I couldn't seem to think straight, everything in my mind was a blur, a mixture of confusion, longing, and shame. But in that moment, none of that mattered. It was as if everything else faded away, leaving only the two of us. We didn't speak. There was no need. The space between us felt charged, electric, as if something was pulling us together. I felt his presence more acutely than I had ever felt it before, every inch of him drawing me closer. My breath caught in my chest as he moved toward me, and before I could process it, his hands were on me. My body tensed for a moment, unsure, but then I felt it, the warmth of his touch, his fingers gently grazing the side of my face. The kiss came next, slow, hesitant at first, as if neither of us was fully sure of what we were doing, but then it deepened, and I couldn't stop myself from responding. My body seemed to know what to do, even if my mind was still struggling to keep up. His hands moved to my waist, tugging gently at my nightwear. It felt so intimate, so wrong, but at the same time, there was a part of me that didn't want to stop. I felt his fingers at the buttons, slowly unfastening them one by one, and every moment seemed to heighten the feeling inside me. My heart raced, my breath quickened, and I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of excitement mixed with the guilt swirling inside me. With each piece of clothing that fell to the floor, it was like the walls I had built up between us were slowly being stripped away, layer by layer. His touch was soft, but there was an urgency beneath it, a need I couldn't ignore. And I couldn't deny it either, the way his fingers felt on my skin, the heat building between us, the way my body responded, even though every logical part of me screamed that it shouldn't. I should have stopped. I should have pushed him away, locked myself in my room and pretended nothing had happened. But it felt so overwhelming, so intense. It felt good. Too good. The desire, the closeness, the feeling of being wanted, it was intoxicating. I didn't want it to stop, and for a moment, I didn't care what was right or wrong. But then, as the moment dragged on, the weight of what I was doing began to settle in. The joy I had felt slowly turned into a sinking feeling in my stomach. What had I done? What had we done? I could barely catch my breath, my heart pounding in my chest as a rush of guilt and shame flooded in. What had I just done? What had we just done? The confusion hit me hard. The emotions were overwhelming, so much desire, so much guilt, all tangled together in a mess I couldn't begin to sort out. What I had just experienced felt both incredible and wrong. And now, as I stood there in the aftermath, the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. There was no going back from this. The silence after it happened was deafening. My mind was still reeling, trying to piece together what had just taken place, but it felt like I was in a fog. The guilt hit first, sharp and overwhelming, making my chest tighten with each breath. Every part of me screamed that it was wrong, that I should never have let it go that far. But beneath it, there was something else, a feeling I couldn't shake off. I stayed up that night, unable to sleep, my thoughts tangled in confusion. I hated myself for what I had done, but at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The way it felt, the closeness, the desire, everything that had seemed so forbidden yet impossible to ignore. It was like I was trapped in a cycle, caught between the wrongness of it all and this strange pull I couldn't control. The next morning, the guilt only got worse. I avoided him at all costs, but every time I saw him, my heart would race. I couldn't bring myself to look him in the eye, and yet, there was this strange, unspoken tension in the air between us. It was like we both knew something had shifted, but neither of us dared to acknowledge it. I wanted to run. I wanted to escape from the feeling swirling inside me. But the truth was, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I hated myself for wanting it again, for imagining what it would feel like to go through it once more. It made me sick to my stomach, but the temptation was so real, so undeniable. Each time I tried to push it away, the memory of the moment crept back. The way he had touched me, the way we had shared that intimacy, it was burned into my mind. And what scared me most was how I couldn't forget how it felt, how much I craved it. The feeling of being close to him, of being wanted in a way I had never felt before, kept me up at night. But no matter how much I wanted to resist, it was becoming harder to fight. The desire, the guilt, the confusion, it was all swirling inside me, and I couldn't make sense of it. I didn't want it to happen again. But then again, I couldn't stop wondering, what if it did? Looking back, I can't deny that part of me remembers how it felt. Despite everything that happened, there was something I can't erase. The way I felt in that moment, the closeness, the warmth, the intensity. It felt good. But as much as I tried to convince myself it was just a moment, something I couldn't control, I know deep down that it was wrong. And not just wrong for me, but wrong for everyone involved. In the end, it wasn't just about crossing a line. It was about the consequences, the damage it could cause to relationships that I once thought were solid. The trust that could be broken in an instant, and the hurt that would follow. I had to confront that, realizing that one moment of temptation could lead to a lifetime of regret. The hardest part, though, was resisting the pull to do it again. Every day felt like a battle between what I knew was right and the desire that lingered. That temptation, no matter how much I hated it, didn't just disappear. It stayed with me, in the back of my mind, like an itch I couldn't scratch. But through it all, I learned one of the most important lessons of my life: some lines can never be crossed, no matter how strong the temptation is. I'm still fighting it, that inner struggle. I'm still learning to hold on to my boundaries and my self-respect, even when everything inside me wants to give in. It's not easy, but I know it's the only way to heal, to move forward, and to protect what matters most. And maybe, just maybe, that's the hardest battle we'll ever face, fighting the desires that threaten to lead us down paths we'll regret. What would you do if you found yourself in a situation like this? Have you ever felt torn between what you know is right and something you just couldn't resist? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Let's talk about the tough moments we all face. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you found it intriguing, please give it a like, subscribe for more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss another story. I'll see you next time, where we dive into more stories about life, love, and everything in between.